Alright, hello, welcome back to the podcast. Once again, everybody, PayPal and Patreon links are down below if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. I apologize for any loud bangs in the background. People are setting off fireworks. Obviously, that's not something I have any control over, just like the CEIC graphs that I'm going to use, as that site has the best ones. However, for reasons unknown to me, they don't update some of them. So before anyone asks, no, I don't know why, and no, I have no control over that. Alright, so the BP Annual Statistical Review of World Energy released, and for this particular episode, we are looking at the ever-increasing global electricity demand levels. And I refer to them as their average active demand level, as in the usual average load that's placed on the grid, which for the US in present day still remains roughly about an average of 500 gigawatts of constant load, obviously higher during certain times of the year than others, as with any other country, and also the exact number fluctuates with different times of the day. But since the mid or late 2000s, because of energy efficiency increases, particularly in the lighting industry, U.S. electricity demand has remained relatively flat for the last 10 to 15 years. And for quick explanation, the CEIC graphs show the numbers for each country as either total annual or total monthly net generation amounts, while the U.S. has a hourly updated active grid load tracker. For almost all the other countries, you have to take the numbers that you're given from the BP release and just work through the math with them. Except you don't, because I've done it for you. So the US staying mostly the same, just like their northern neighbor, Canada, who has also mostly been the same for a number of years now, hovering right around a usual active demand level of about 70 gigawatts. Mexico, meanwhile, has been increasing in demand as they continue economically rising, and over the past 10 or 11 years, from 2011 up until now, they have increased not as quickly as they were in prior decades, but they have increased from 33 up to averaging about 38 gigawatts of demand. Peru increasing by larger proportions. Over the last decade or a dozen years, they've gone from about 4.5 up to 7 gigawatts of active demand on average. Brazil, since 2011 or 2012, has increased by about 20%, starting with an average demand around 60 gigawatts and now averaging between 72 and 73. Argentina leveled off for a while and only has increased a bit over the last decade or so, from 15 up to about 17 gigawatts of demand on average, whereas their neighbor Chile over the same time period has increased from an average demand of about 7.5 up to about 10. Venezuela has gone down, as you probably could expect, since the country kind of collapsed at the end of the 2010s. Before completely imploding on itself, Venezuela had an average electricity demand level of around 14 or 15 gigawatts, and it fell down to now having an average of only about half that, or a little bit above half, about 8.5 gigawatts. Now, over across the Pacific, the only country with a higher electricity demand level than the US, take a guess, you guessed right, I'm assuming at least, it's China. China already surpassed the US in electricity demand at the start of the 2010s, hitting 530 gigawatts of average demand, and last year they had already gotten up to 890, having grown slower over 2020, so the resumption in growth over the course of last year led us to the start of this year, China reaching an average demand level of 970 gigawatts. China basically now composing about a third of the Earth's electricity demand in total. And since I referenced the global demand total, around 2011 or 2012, global electricity demand total averaged around 2.5 terawatts. Last year it reached 3 terawatts, and as of this year, it has hit 3.1. Will we reach 4 terawatts of total global demand before everything starts to fall apart? We'll have to wait and see. India, starting off the 2010s around 120 gigawatts of average demand load. Last year, they were at 175. As of the start of this year, they're almost at 200, up to an average of 195. Japan has gradually, over the course of time, been decreasing in electricity demand, both from a combination of energy efficiency improvements and also continued aging of their population, since as people get older, they gradually start to go less places and do less stuff. So around the start of the 2010s, Japan's electricity demand level averaged around 125 gigawatts, and now it's down to about 115 as of this year. South Korea, meanwhile, has actually still been increasing over the past dozen years or so, has gone from about 60 gigawatts on average up to now about 70 as of this year. Vietnam, meanwhile, over the last 10 to 12 years, has more than doubled. Back around 2011 or 2012, they were at about only 12 gigawatts of demand. Last year, they were already up to 26, and this year, the start of this year at least, they jumped up by another 2, now averaging 28 gigawatts of electricity demand. Indonesia is continuing to rise as well. They started off the 2010s around 20 gigawatts of active demand. Last year, they'd gotten up to 33. As of this year, they're now up by 2 more, also up to 35. Bangladesh also going up by more than double, increasing over the last dozen years or so from 5 up to now just under 12 on average. Pakistan over the same time frame going from about 12 up to 17. Malaysia still increasing but also starting to slow down. Back in 2011 or 2012 they were at about 14 gigawatts of average demand, and as of this year they are up to an average of 20. Thailand did still increase a bit over the 2010s, starting off that decade around 17 gigawatts of average demand, and as of the start of this year being up to an average of about 21. Kazakhstan has increased by about 30% in their demand, growing from an average demand load of about 10 gigawatts up to 13 over the last dozen years, while Saudi Arabia has gone up by quite a bit over the last dozen years or so, starting off the 2010s at about 28.5 gigawatts, and as of this year being all the way up at 41 on average. Oman, meanwhile, literally doubled from 2 up to 4. The UAE, as they ever keep building and adding more stuff, they have gone up from 11.5 at the start of the 2010s up to 16 gigawatts now. Qatar, the peninsula nation in the Persian Gulf, over the same time went up from 3.5 up to 5.5. Kuwait went up from 6.5 up to 9. Iraq more than doubled over the last dozen years, from only 5 gigawatts of average demand up to now 12.5. And across the Persian Gulf, Iran followed a similar demand increase to Saudi Arabia, increasing from about 26 up to now 41 gigawatts of average demand. Turkey also continuing to rise quickly, starting off the 2010s around 26 gigawatts of average demand, and now as of 2022 being up to an average of 37. Egypt starting off the time frame around 17, and this year being up to 24. And Algeria starting off around 6 back in 2011 or 2012, currently at 9.5. South Africa has, because of internal economic turmoil and many other issues, South Africa's electricity demand actually went flat and decreased over the last dozen years from 29 down to an average of 27 gigawatts. Meanwhile, excluding the North African countries and South Africa, so excluding South Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt, the rest of Africa combined over the last dozen years has increased from a grand total of about 25 gigawatts of active demand to an average active demand load of about 40 as of this year. And swinging back over to the Philippines, because I forgot, they have increased over that time frame from 8 up to an average of 12. And Australia has remained mostly flat, although their demand level has increased by a little bit over the last dozen years, from 29 up to now an average of 31 this year. Russia's electricity demand since 2011 or 2012 has increased by a bit under 10%. Growing from an average of 120 up to an average of 130 gigawatts. And finally, Europe collectively, although CEIC did not have a Europe graph, they only had a European Union graph, but the total for Europe minus Turkey and Russia, so excluding Turkey and Russia, the collective Europe demand has decreased over the last dozen years from about 435 gigawatts of average demand at the start of the 2010s down to about a flat 400 on average as of the start of this year. Alright, that's it for this one. So thank you everybody for sticking around and listening. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't already. PayPal and Patreon links are down there if you want to support me. Only do so if you actually can. Or you can watch or listen to any of the other dozens or even hundreds of other episodes I have on here at this point. Or you can subscribe to my cat for way less depressing content and help us get her up to 1,000 subs before the November deadline. But no matter what happens to me, may God bless and protect you all, and I will see you all around next time.